Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Predictive Analytics podcast. Rhys Tiller. We have great guest Marcus Mosher,
Yep.
on the show. And Marcus and I just started following each other on Twitter. And one of the coolest things, I saw that you hit the 1 million downloads. That is awesome, man.
It was a pretty exciting thing for Landon and I, my co-host on the Locked On Cowboys podcast, to get 1 million downloads without a single NFL game being played yet for the year. We were pretty excited about that.
And I don't want to go too far off the trail here, but it's amazing to me that so we had the NFL draft that did huge numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
NBA has done very little, and I expect the NFL to be outstanding numbers. Just because, appetite's there, right?
Right. I think there's a lot of people that just are craving sports content right now, and we're lucky enough to have a podcast and a platform where we can do that every single day. So we're very thankful for all of our listeners.
I'm with you. So I wanted to pub you as much as I can.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
Especially since you started a Dynasty podcast with one of our good friends we had on last week, Ryan McDowell, and Matt Williamson, and I've been on the Blueprint before, and those guys are pretty fun.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun, and the other one that you didn't mention is Kate Madjuk from FF Ball Blast. So she's actually my co-host on the podcast that we do. We do 2 shows a week.
Oh.
Matt and Ryan do 2 shows a week, and then we're going to have some intermingling between all of us 4 in another episode. So it's a great cast. I feel like a fish out of water a little bit with those 3. Those guys have been doing Dynasty football for a long, long time, but we're really excited to get that going.
When Ryan was on this podcast last week, he and I started in one league, and he wasn't a commish, and this was his first league to commish. It was Hyperactive 1. And I asked him how long ago it's been because it feels like forever.
Right.
It was 2006.
Jeez. That's a long time to be playing Dynasty football. It really is.
I know. And he beat me in the finals this year. And so that's even better.
Did he brag about it?
No, if there's anybody I don't mind losing to, it's Ryan and this guy next to me. I'm good, man. I'm good.
I feel like losing to family members is worse because they remind you all year long about it. So I play in a couple leagues with some of my brother and my sister and some family members, and those are the ones. There's no money on the line or anything like that, but those are the ones I care the most about because when you're having your family Christmas or whatever get together, you always like to have that little jab of, hey, remember who's the champion here.
Oh, especially when they're 14.
Yeah.
I'm like, I play in a dozen leagues, and yours is one of them, and you're like taunting this one victory over me.
It was the finals victory.
I know. He's taking victory laps.
No, if you win, you should absolutely be allowed to take victory laps. That's why we play this stupid game.
Oh, the best saying I heard about this is the football doesn't spike itself, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Ball will not spike itself. See, you learned something today. All right. So we started this podcast because Rhys wrote this little book, and he's pulling stuff out. So, Marcus, if he hits you with numbers, just know he is a numbers-loving dude.
I love it.
All right. You are – let's just recap. Raiders, Cowboys, you follow them very tight.
Mm-hmm.
Rhys has a thing section here about Carolina offense with Teddy. How do you see – so Raiders being a favorite going all the way across the country, that's hard for me to swallow given the Raiders' average team, maybe a little below average.
Yeah, and unfortunately, if you look at the history of John Gruden as a head coach, when he's had to travel to the East Coast and play an early 1 p.m. Eastern time start, it's not great. Some of the numbers are pretty bad. His teams typically get off to some pretty slow starts. I know the Panthers are 3.5-point home dogs, which seems like quite a bit. But there's a lot of optimism around this Raiders team, and I think that's why sports books have them as a field goal favorite here.
Yeah, and I think it's because Carolina defense stinks, but that's a different story.
And that's what it is, right? They're relying on a lot of young players. Their whole draft class was, defensive picks this year. We'll see who's playing linebacker for them. I think the Raiders are going to be able to run the ball right through them. But it's going to be a fascinating game because the two styles are completely different from one another. At least we think, right? We know the Raiders want to play a ball control, 2 tight ends, a fullback on the field a lot of times, that style of grinded out football. And then the Panthers under Bridgewater and Joe Brady, I mean, we think that they're going to be this vertical passing offense, get rid of the ball quickly, get the ball to your, skill players. But we haven't seen it yet. So this is, to me, one of the more interesting games that we're going to have in week 1.
Me too. And what do you think about Josh Jacobs, Rhys?
Well, the Panthers were the worst team against running backs last year. In fact, they allowed a touchdown every 14 carries and allowed 5.32 rushing yards per carry. And the Panthers allowed 18% more fantasy points to running backs than any other team.
So what you're saying is this is a week to make sure Josh Jacobs is in your lineup in DFS, right? You're going to want to make sure that he's your number 1 running back for the week. Or
a Jalen Richard if you're just scraping bottom, right?
If you think this is going to be a higher scoring game where the Raiders could get behind early, Richard is really the only passing back they have in the roster. They still don't trust Josh Jacobs to do that a ton. I think they want to limit his touches in the passing game a little bit. So yeah, as a bottom barrel play in DFS or a what the heck flex, I think that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, because, 5 catches, 50 yards, half a touchdown.
And he's explosive, too. If he can get a, pass in the open field, we've seen him, turn a 7-yard Texas route into a 40-yard gain. So, Richard definitely a nice deep sleeper play this week.
Yep. What else you thinking there, Rhys?
Well, for the Panthers on Derek Carr, Panthers did not allow a quarterback to finish higher than quarterback 7, but did not allow one. He only allowed 2 to finish worse than quarterback 22 last year in PPR.
So mid-level. But that's where I would put Carr. I'd put Carr quarterback 15, 18 this week, maybe 12.
Yeah, I don't think he's a bad play. I think there is going to be some adjustment there at receiver now. They're going to be starting 2 rookie receivers in Henry Ruggs and Brian Edwards. Hunter Renfrow is going to play in the slot. So I do think there's going to be some growing pains there. Yeah. But again, for a 2-quarterback league, DFS, if you're looking to go cheap, I do think Carr is a nice option this week.
Yeah.
Especially with Carolina's cornerback 1 this week. Wait, Dante Jackson allowed a touchdown once every 10 targets. So,
and that's a fun matchup. Dante Jackson on Henry Ruggs, probably the fastest wide receiver cornerback matchup that we'll have in the NFL all season long. It's an interesting one to watch. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think the Raiders are going to attack Dante Jackson. So this might be a Henry Ruggs week if you're, again, looking for a 3rd receiver or a flex in your lineup.
Also, I think Henry Ruggs is miscast by us in the fantasy community. Everybody thinks he's a deep ball guy. He's not. He's a take it across the middle and turn up field kind of guy.
Yeah, and that's really why the Raiders went out and targeted him, right? They didn't need somebody who could stretch the field. They just needed a receiver that can catch a 5-yard slant and take it to the house. I mean, Derek Carr has traditionally not been a quarterback who's throwing the ball down the field. Now, when he does, he typically does it well. It's just not something he loves to do. So get guys that can make plays in space. And that's why I think he's a pretty good fit for this Raiders offense.
Yeah, and I think Carr played well down the stretch last year.
Mm-hmm. He finished his career with the highest completion percentage, most passing yards, highest passer rating of his career. He wasn't bad at all, and I don't think he gets enough credit for what he did down the stretch for the Raiders last year.
I'm 100% on board. Also, I don't think Teddy gets credit. Along with Joe Brady and Rule and those guys, I don't think they get enough credit. Rhys, you got some numbers here?
Well, you mentioned Teddy Bridgewater. He's another great stream this week. Raiders had allowed a ridiculous 6.27 touchdown percentage passing.
So that's 1 out of every 16 catches.
Which is really good. As they only allowed 31 pass attempts 5 times. but still
Gave up a lot.
Yeah, gave up a lot. And 9 of the 16 quarterbacks times they faced a quarterback last year, one of them finished as a quarterback 1 or top 12.
So the Raiders played well in defense.
That's debatable, especially with their cornerback 1 being in a cast right now, who's gonna go up against DJ Moore, and cut their cornerback that they signed, Prince Amukamara. It just feels like they can't stop the Panthers receiving core to go bonkers this week.
So, yes, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, everybody loves DJ Moore. Everybody loves him. And one of our good friends, Matt Harmon, loves Samuel. And I see some rumblings about Robbie Anderson. If you had, and let's call it relative value, just because if I said flat, everybody say DJ Moore.
Sure.
Relative value, which one do you think is going to have a better game?
I think it's going to be whoever plays in the slot. And now this has been something the Raiders have been trying to figure out all week, because if it's DJ Moore in the slot, he is going to have a field day. The Raiders slot cornerback is LaMarcus Joyner, who graded out as one of Pro Football Focus's worst cornerbacks in the league last year. A lot of people on that team believe that job will eventually go to 4th-round pick Amik Robertson, who they drafted this year. But Joyner, listen, he's not that good. He's really struggled. The Raiders couldn't get out of his contract this year, and they really have no choice but to play him right now. So they theoretically put Robbie Anderson and Curtis Samuel on the outside, and DJ Moore is playing in the slot. I think he is going to smash this week. I think he is going to dominate. I think the Panthers are going to do everything possible to get him the ball in space, get him a ton of touches. Joyner was one of the worst tackling defensive backs in all football last year. I think he is in for a monster week 1.
How about Ian Thomas? Do you like him?
Yeah, so the Raiders have really struggled with tight ends over the last couple of years. Now, a lot of this is going to depend on his health. He's got a toe injury, I believe. I think he's questionable in this game. But the Raiders have basically all new middle of the field guys. Jonathan Abram was hurt in week 1 last year, never played another snap. They brought over Jeff Heath from the Cowboys to play that free safety spot. He's a new name. And then at linebacker, they have 3 new linebackers in Corey Littleton, Nick Kwiatkowski, and Raekwon Millen. Those should be upgrades over last year. But again, that's a lot of new names on this defense. So I think Ian Thomas as a mid-level, cheaper play for DFS or, in your lineups this week in just a redraft or dynasty, I think he's a pretty good bet, assuming that he is active.
The one thing about Kwiatkowski, I think is his name, and Littleton, is that they're both faster guys that are able to cover the tight end better than most linebackers.
Yeah, and both of those guys graded out very well by Pro Football Focus in coverage last year. They both can have their issues in the run, but that's the exact reason why they brought him in, is to stop tight ends like Ian Thomas.
Yeah, the Raiders and the Cardinals were the ones that every fantasy owner, every fantasy manager would be like, okay, let me pick up somebody off the waiver wire to go against Arizona or the Raiders.
Yep, you knew when your tight end was playing against the Raiders, you were in for a good day.
I will say that you brought up a point earlier that I wanted to touch on, then we'll go to a different game. I think that the Raiders have an advantage because of continuity on coaching staff, quarterback, things of that nature. And these teams like the Panthers, all new staff, new quarterback, even a new receiver too in Robbie Anderson, there could be some growing pains, and that could be why the Raiders are over a field goal pick. That seems like a lot for the Raiders. So it makes me think that there's something that Vegas knows about the continuity issues for some of these teams.
The other thing is I just don't think Carolina's offensive line is very good. They traded away Trey Turner this offseason for Russell Okung. I feel like that's a downgrade, even though you're getting a tackle versus a guard. The Raiders don't have a great pass rush. Now they have guys they like on their defensive line, but Bridgewater isn't the most mobile quarterback. So if there is some pressure, and I expect the Raiders to blitz a little bit in this game, I think Teddy could struggle a little bit, but I think you hit the nail on the head there. This is a whole new offense for Bridgewater. It's new receivers. They're trying to fit in all these guys and find the right spots. But to me, it's going to boil down to Christian McCaffrey, right? It just feels like if McCaffrey can make enough splash plays on offense, it's not going to matter whether he has a connection with Robbie Anderson and Curtis Samuel yet. It's just Christian McCaffrey and whether he can do enough on offense to win this game.
Well, you mentioned McCaffrey, but the Raiders allowed over 205 fantasy points to running backs through the air last year. So this is not exactly a good thing for the Raiders to go up against McCaffrey week 1 with, as you mentioned, pretty much completely new middle of the field players.
Now, that's what they're hoping is the new guys can cut down on that stuff because they were playing guys like Tahir Whitehead and Vontaze Burfict and Nicholas Morrow in those linebacker spots last year. Littleton is just such an upgrade there that I expect them to be significantly better against the pass. But I still think it's going to be a problem for them. So they're going to try to do it. I imagine that Joe Brady and Bridgewater are going to do everything possible to get McCaffrey matched up in space. And I expect him to have another huge game.
But in that division, you have the Chiefs with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Broncos with Melvin Gordon and Philip Lindsay, and Austin Eckler. So you need a permanent fix, not just a fix for this game, if you want to be successful this season.
That's a good point.
And I think, and that's why the Raiders went out and spent so much money at that linebacker position because, for years they've really struggled to find anybody that can cover. They went through a bunch of washed up guys between, Navarro Bowman and Burfict and Whitehead. So they wanted a real fix. And I think Littleton and Kinkowski will eventually give them that.
But later on in their schedule, outside the division, they play Le'Veon Bell, James White, Leonard Fournette, Alvin Kamara, and Todd Gurley, all pretty good receiving backs, at least above average. And if you include that plus the 6 times you play the division backs, you definitely need a long-term fix.
But it's also understandable why they said, hey, I guess we got to fill this hole. And so anyway, let's move on to you also cover the Cowboys. And so I live in the land of Cowboys. I'm not a real Cowboys fan. So the Aldon Smith signing, we were not thinking about this, but we were kind of chuckling about some of his antics when he was with the Niners, especially the airport incident. And earlier today, you know what I'm talking about, Marcus? When
I do.
It's not like I have a bomb, and
Right.
I have 2 teenagers, and we were talking, what do you not say? And where do you not say it? And so, but I think he adds a lot to the Cowboys front. I mean, the Cowboys with a great offense need to be able to get a pass rush like they haven't had in the last few years. I mean, consistent. Is that your thought?
Yeah, and the Cowboys brought him in because, of the familiarity with their defensive line coach, Jim Tomsula, who was there in San Francisco when he was playing at an all-pro level. The Cowboys are going to do a lot of interesting things with Aldon Smith. If you look at their depth chart that they released, and I know it's unofficial, but he was actually listed as a strong side linebacker in their 4-3 defense. You will see him doing that and playing in space some, which is it's crazy for a guy that weighed in at 293 pounds at camp. For his ability to move around is crazy. And then in certain nickel situations, you're going to see him actually kick out from Sam linebacker down to nose tackle. And he can do that really well, actually. He's been having a fantastic camp playing inside as a defensive tackle. He's really their X factor on defense. If he can play as well as he has in camp, the Cowboys should have a fun little defensive line there.
Yeah, the one thing I would interject is, and I kind of poke fun at him, but there's 1,600 roughly players in the NFL. And a lot of these guys, from the hits they take, everybody talks concussions, but we don't talk about the concussions they got in
middle school and high
or
school.
Lower even, right? In like
Absolutely.
the little leagues and the middle school and high school. And, the only reason it rolls up to the NFL is because that's where the deeper pockets are.
Right.
And, the Jordan Reeds of the world, and it makes me pretty sad because these guys are young guys. Aldon Smith's a young guy. When we think of the length of his life, he's a young guy.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's just sad, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think he's actually matured quite a bit over the last 2 or 3 years, being outside of football. So he's believe it or not, and this is crazy because I mean, it's not that long ago we can remember that incident at the airport, or when he was he was found sleeping in a parking lot in his car, and he's really matured and he's become a leader in that locker room and somebody a lot of those guys look up to. So I think this has a chance to be one of the better stories from the NFL season. And I personally, I cannot wait to see him on Sunday Night Football because, when we last saw him, he was playing at about 260, 265 pounds. He's put on like 30 pounds of muscle and he's moving fantastic. And, listen, this is one of the best pass rushers of the decade. He came in having 19 and a half sacks as a rookie, 20 sacks the following year. So to have somebody who's been off of football this long come back and potentially contribute is pretty exciting for Cowboy fans and NFL fans.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, you give young guys lots of money. You tell them they're great, and then they have all these hits that and they also won't have the foundation, the family structures, possibly. Right. I'm generalizing. I don't, I'm trying to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. They may not have the full setup to make them great. I think of Darius Hayward-Bay.
Good example. Nope.
His mom, have you seen the story? His mom put him on a restricted allowance, gave him like, 50, 60 grand a year and he's made tens of millions in his career. I mean, he has enough for generations because his mom took care of him. And anyway, it's just one of those things that we probably gloss over, myself included, these guys, that what their road has been.
Right. And I think Aldon Smith is going to have a pretty cool story to tell when it's all said and done. From you mentioned it, he was a top 10 pick in the 2011 draft. That was when those rookies were being paid like at the top of the position. So he got a ton of money as a 21-year-old, and then basically to throw that all away and be able to work himself back into the NFL 4 years later. I think it's a pretty cool story.
Oh yeah.
Well, speaking of another cool story, Randy Gregory's been reinstated for another edge rusher. They also signed Everson Griffin. They have DeMarcus Lawrence, drafted Neville Gallimore, and I believe they also have Don Terry Poe. So they have a pretty deep defensive line to pair with the guys they already had, and Blake Van Der Esch and Jalen Smith as their duo of middle linebackers. And those two can also rush the passer pretty well.
Yeah, it's a talented defensive line unit. And, we're not going to see them all in week one because Randy Gregory he's actually still suspended until week 6. But eventually, hopefully, when we get all those guys on the field at the same time, they can put together some pretty cool packages of, DeMarcus Lawrence and Aldon Smith inside with Randy Gregory and Everson Griffin on the outside. It's going to be exciting. Now, the defensive tackle spot is a little dicey. Now, they signed Gerald McCoy in the offseason. He actually hurt his quad on the very first practice. So they're relying on 2 young defensive tackles in Tristan Hill, who they drafted in the 2019 draft, and then Neville Gallimore, who you mentioned in the 2020 draft. Tristan Hill's been significantly better than Gallimore, but they're going to need him to step up in order to survive this first couple weeks of the season until they kind of find the right rotation. But in terms of overall talent, this is one of the deeper and better defensive lines that we've seen from the Cowboys in the last decade.
And then Jalen Smith gets moved to weak side, right? To utilize his speed.
Yeah, and I was going to say, in this Mike Nolan defense, part of the reason why they moved him to the weak side is because that position actually blitzes the quarterback a little bit more than in the previous role, in Rod Marinelli and Chris Richard's 4-3 defense. So it's not going to be all that uncommon to see Jalen be the 5th or even 6th rusher on a lot of plays. They're going to be highly, highly aggressive on defense. They're probably going to give up more big plays than Cowboy fans are accustomed to seeing. But the move from Jalen to middle to weak side should allow him to be playing downhill more than he did last season.
Yeah, plus if that defense is weak, it's in the back, right? I mean, just
right. Yep.
And so this matchup against Sean McVay is pretty interesting because I don't think Goff I think Goff's numbers last year, fantasy players have skewed him to look at it negatively. And we had, who was it, Scott Barrett or Graham Barfield talked about the regression on touchdowns.
I believe that was Rich Rebar.
Oh, it was Rebar, sorry. Talked about how he got stuck at the one seven times. And, so he lost those 7 touchdowns where the receiver got tackled inside the one. And so, it's just one of those things that we could see Goff playing better than this coming year than what people are giving him credit for last year.
Yep, I agree. I think what's going to be interesting about this Rams offense this year is where does the speed come from, right? Because previously that was Brandon Cooks that was stretching the field, and that was forcing defenses to play on their heels a little bit. They run a ton of bootlegs and all that kind of stuff. But if there's not anybody taking the top off the defense, how scary of an offense is this really? And that's what I'm curious to see on Sunday night. Are the Cowboys going to load up, the line of scrimmage and play everybody within 10 yards and dare Goff to throw the ball deep and stand in the pocket? We'll see. Maybe that's Van Jefferson, their second-round pick out of Florida. Maybe he eventually grows into that role. But as of right now, I don't see – no, these words are going to come back to bite me. I'm sure of it. But I don't see a super explosive Rams offense. I see one that's going to have to be very methodical. And I just don't trust Goff yet to do that. I don't trust him to throw 6, 7, good passes in a row to lead it to a touchdown. But we shall see. It's going to be a fascinating matchup.
I agree. I think we don't give McVay enough credit. I mean, because McVay, I think, is awesome. I also see him more in 12 personnel, so it may be Higbee or Everett. I'm a huge Van Jefferson fan, but he's not even that fast. I know he was gimpy at the combine, but he's not even that fast. It may be Woods. I mean, this offense, the Rams offense reminds me more of maybe the Vikings last year, where a lot of 12 personnel, Thielen and Diggs weren't that fast, but they still got open.
Yeah, and that's what's going to have to be like for at least the start of the season. I like Robert Woods a lot, but he's somebody in fantasy that actually hasn't produced all that well when he's when they've had the full lineup. When like a Brandon Cooks has been there, he's actually kind of struggled a little bit from a fantasy production stuff. Cooper Kupp's numbers went down quite a bit in the second half of the season. I think Tyler Higbee is going to have a bigger role in that offense, but it's just a lot of unknowns right now. And maybe the reason I'm a little bit less optimistic than most on their offense is their interior offensive line makes me really nervous. And if you look at Goff's numbers under pressure, he's really struggled. The interior of that offensive line, and even Rob Havenstein struggling a little bit at right tackle last year, has become a problem. So if they can't fix their issues on the offensive line, I think this offense might just be in the middle of the pack like it was last year.
They had the 31st ranked offensive line, I believe, by Pro Football Focus. And that's not going to do very well if you're going up against DeMarcus Lawrence, Everson Griffin, and Jalen Smith.
Yeah, especially that right side. As I mentioned, I still think Andrew Whitworth is one of the best left tackles in the league. But from that spot on, it gets a little dicey. So that's certainly one matchup to monitor. And I'm curious to see how Goff does handling the blitz. He is somebody who has traditionally struggled when teams blitz him. I expect the Cowboys to do that a ton on Sunday night just to see how the offensive line is holding up. So if Goff can handle the pressure and the Rams can block the front of the Cowboys, I would not be surprised if they have a pretty decent game.
Well, Belichick is well known for being able to stop his opponent very well. I think there's a very good reason why they kept on blitzing him, and then the Rams scored 3 points.
Yeah, it was they really struggled to block Dante Hightower on just A-gap blitzes, and again with Jalen Smith playing that weak side linebacker spot for the Cowboys, I expect a lot of the same this week. We'll see if the Rams over the offseason figured out a way to stop the blitz.
Yeah, and the other interesting piece for me is Cam Akers, right? Is he gonna? I'm unsure. Rookie running backs that are competing against Malcolm Brown, I expect them to be the far and away winner. And when I hear these oh, Malcolm Brown's the starter stuff, it kind of makes me worry. And maybe it should. Maybe it's like Dobbins being third string, fourth string for the Ravens. But you know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
If the
I would say it's a little different though in the situations, right? Because the Ravens have an established, a couple guys in Mark Ingram and even Gus Edwards, who's, one of the most efficient running backs in football. But when you have Malcolm Brown, who a little bit of a plotter, just kind of just a guy a little bit, it does make you a little nervous. And listen, I'm going to ask you guys a question. Do we think this backfield stays as a committee all season long, or do you think eventually McVay is going to find his guy to ride with?
I think he's going to try to, but Henderson's got to be healthy, and he hasn't been. You look at all three guys last year, including Gurley, Henderson, and Brown, they all each average less than 4 yards per carry. You could say it's offensive line. You could say it's talent in the backfield. But if that's the same this year, then McVay's not going to have his guy.
I still love Darrell Henderson. I still think he might be the best fit in this offense if he can eventually figure out how to run some of the zone stuff, because what we saw at Memphis with his speed, and if this offensive line can gel, I just think the talent is too good for him to be only a complimentary back or to sit on the bench.
Me too.
Mentioning Memphis running backs, people forgot last year, Pollard I don't know if he rushed for it all, but he accounted for over 140 yards of scrimmage against the Rams last year.
And then Henderson, and then, they have Gibson this year and Gainwell next year. Memphis had the running backs, haven't they?
They have, and I'm glad that you brought up Tony Pollard, because that was his best game as a rookie, was against the Rams in Week 15. I think, and there's a reason why I think that happened. Now, the Cowboys' offensive line was playing really well in that game, but one of the biggest weaknesses the Rams have as a team is their inside linebackers. It's just not a very good group. They've already had some injuries there. Micah Kaiser and Kenny Young are expected to be their starters, and those are two of the worst linebackers in the league, according to Pro Football Focus. I expect the Cowboys to run the ball a bunch in this game, a lot of outside zone, trying to see how those linebackers can play in space. Don't be surprised if this is a Tony Pollard game with the Cowboys. Use him a lot in the backfield, flex him out to the slot, just to test those young linebackers to see how good they are to start the year.
Last year, Dak only threw the ball 23 times against them, and only, I believe, 8 in the second half.
They killed them on the ground. They had over 200 yards rushing on that one. It was one of the easiest 40-point performances you'll ever see in the NFL.
So Rhys brings the heat. He brings the numbers.
He's got it, man. He's got it.
Set up guy.
Yeah. Well, Zeke and Pollard combined for over 300 yards of scrimmage last time. So I don't know if that's going to happen, but with the addition of Jalen Ramsey to lock down Cooper, as Cooper's been horrendous against Ramsey in his 2 games against him, he had 2 targets, 1 catch, 9 yards, and 5 targets, 4 catches, 29 yards, 0 touchdowns. So if Ramsey shadows Cooper, I definitely expect the Cowboys to run the ball a little bit more and this to be a Gallup game, especially if he goes up against Troy Hill.
Yeah, and this is the reason why the Cowboys decided to invest so much in the receiving corps, because Amari can be taken out a little bit depending on the matchup, and this is just a bad matchup for him, right? Jalen Ramsey is arguably the best cornerback in the league. Cooper's even a little bit nicked up with a hamstring injury, but most teams don't have 3 really good cornerbacks. So the Cowboys, they're not going to pound their head against the wall here. And that's what Mike McCarthy and Kellen Moore talked about. If they've got another matchup on the other side of the field that they like, they're just going to keep throwing the ball there. So I think you're right in pointing out Michael Gallup. I'll give you one more. I think this is a Blake Jarwin game.
I was going to say it. You beat me to it.
It's a Blake Jarwin game because of the linebackers we just mentioned. And then there's safeties. Taylor Rapp, who was a rookie last year, great in run defense, not the fastest safety. He ran in the 4.7s at his pro day. They've got Terrell Burgess, who they drafted in the 3rd round from Utah this year. Both of those are smaller safeties. I expect Blake Jarwin to be able to make some plays down the field and after the catch this one. So those are the 2 guys between Gallup and Jarwin where I expect the Cowboys passing game to be funneled to this week.
I'm a huge Jarwin guy. And in fact, for fantasy, I've been Herndon, Jarwin. Don't take any of these. Herndon don't take any of these Hunter Henrys or any of those guys. Wait and get Jarwin and Chris Herndon.
Yeah, and I think this is a team that's going to hopefully be in the red zone a lot, and they're going to be moving the ball. So if Jarwin can get some of the, the looks inside the red zone, and I think he will because, as great as Amari Cooper has been in the NFL, he's not really a guy that wins the red zone all that much. You have CeeDee Lamb, who I think eventually could get there. Michael Gallup has shown signs of being able to win in the red zone, but I do think when Prescott gets inside the 20, he's looking for Blake Jarwin on up the field passes, on read options. So I think he's a good bet this week.
Jason Wynn got over 80 targets last season for the Cowboys. Jarwin with 7.
It just kills me when you say 80 targets. It's just such a rough number. Why they felt the need to force so many passes to him. But I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. It was just
he's the running dad joke, right? I mean, he's the dad. He's the dad out on the flag football field. But
it's so frustrating.
But you get him still with the Raiders, though, man. It's the pleasure that never leaves you.
I was so upset. I mean, of all teams, man, there's 29 other teams he could have went to, and
that dude Malik Collins, though.
Yeah, that one's good. I'm happy with that.
And Jeff Heath. Jarwin has turned 77 career targets into 58 catches, 672 yards, and 6 touchdowns.
The other thing I want to mention, you mentioned CeeDee Lamb, Marcus.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are too excited about him, for fantasy. Rookie receivers without a training camp, without a preseason. Let's give him 6 or 7 games before we expect much. I mean, even A.J. Brown last year, it took him late in the year to get going.
He had his one big game against Cleveland the first of the year where he had like 3 for 90. But that was his one game. And it was a bunch of fluke plays, like plus coverages. Even
Metcalf took him a while. All I meant, though, is I see way too high of expectations for Lamb early in the season. Is that fair?
Now, I'm gonna actually push back a little bit here for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think he was fantastic at training camp. If you ask anybody who was at camp who the best receiver was, 9 out of 10 people would tell you it was CeeDee Lamb. So he was really good. And you're right about rookie receivers. For the most part, they tend to struggle in the first half of the season. Every once in a while, you'll see a guy pop like Terry McLaurin did in week 1 last year against Philadelphia. But how many first-round receivers are the 3rd or 4th option in the passing offense, right? He's not going to be dealing with a team's best cornerback. He probably won't even be dealing with their 2nd-best cornerback. So to get a guy in a slot who is dealing with, less than probably average cornerback play, who is so explosive after the catch, I don't think he's going to be the team's leading receiver. Let me say that. But I do think he's going to be in a great position to have some really big weeks in the first half of the season. They probably will be a little bit, hit or miss, but I do think there's a lot to be excited about with Lamb this year.
I think long-term, I'm 100% agreement with you, especially when you get to play Washington and the Giants twice.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think the games that they're up, they're going to feed Zeke. And so, there's going to be a lot of games where the passing game isn't going to be as involved. And then you're looking at, okay, the 3rd or 4th option. I did see one of your tweets, and I wanted to pile on positively, even though you're pushing back on me. I want to pile on positively that there are definitely enough targets for those 3 receivers, Jarwin and the running backs, to all be filled like Thanksgiving dinner. And there's not a problem there because the issue is, like in the fantasy world, everybody's on Minshew. The reason I'm not enough touchdowns. The reason you should be on Dallas, there will be enough touchdowns to go around. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, and I think the other thing is the Cowboys are going to live in 11 personnel this year. They're going to have 3 receivers on the field. They really don't have a 4th receiver, and they don't really have a 2nd tight end. So all of their passing offense is going to be funneled to those 4 guys, including the tight end, right? The 3 receivers and the tight end. So I don't think you're going to get a lot of random touchdowns and catches by, guys that aren't in that top 3. And I think you're right in identifying this offense. I think this offense is going to score a ton of points. I also think the secondary is really young, and they're starting a lot of guys on rookie contracts. They let their best cornerback go in Byron Jones. I think they're going to have to score in a lot of these games. And if you look at their schedule in the first 3 weeks playing, the Rams, Seattle, and Atlanta, these are going to be high-scoring games. So, yeah, I think it's pretty realistic to think all these guys can get fed and get enough touches to be fantasy relevant as soon as the first couple of weeks of the season.
Right, because Lamb could go 3 for 40 and a touch, and that's still relevant. You know what I mean? That's still not bad.
Right.
And he is a huge upgrade over Cobb. I see I'm going to transition. We'll finish with one last game because we're all excited about Thursday Night Football. And you mentioned Brandon Cooks. He's iffy for the game. Everybody's talking up Cobb. The Cobb that I saw in Dallas last year should not scare defenses. They should not. I don't know if you agree or not. I mean, possession receiver, fine. But he's not going to be the guy that Houston wants to catch 10 balls because that may be 70 yards.
Right. He's not as explosive as he once was with Green Bay now. And part of the thing is, too, is he's dropping a lot of passes. He actually led the league in drops last season. He can make some plays after the catch. But, yeah, I think you're right. I don't see him as a guy that defenses need to worry about. Now, the receiver that I think is going to have a monster game, and I'm sure everybody else agrees, we got a healthy Will Fuller for week 1. This is the time to play him, right? He's never going to be healthier than he is right now. You got to have him in your lineup, and I would assume, there's going to be a ton of points scored in this game, and it's the only receiver that Deshaun Watson knows really well. So is it possible that we see 10-plus targets to Will Fuller this week? I certainly think so.
Especially as 10-point dogs, right? And
Absolutely.
The tight end, I like Jordan Akins. I think Jordan Akins is underappreciated in all the fantasy community. And because, everybody remembers Fells caught way too many touchdowns or way too few targets last year. Warring's on injured reserve. Akins has a chance to pop this year.
I would agree. I think the thing is going to be here is how often does Deshaun Watson settle for the underneath routes? And that's kind of been a problem through his whole career is, they've had talented running backs and talented tight ends, but Watson's always looking to make plays outside of the pocket, plays down the field. Is there going to be enough consistent volume for a tight end to be super fantasy, relevant? I'm not sure, but I think we'll get a pretty good idea in week 1, how valuable those tight ends will be.
All right, so Rhys, we'll close this up. In our conversation with Hasley, you threw out the stat about both defenses giving up how much to the opposing running backs?
Over 28 point fantasy PPR points per game. So, especially for Clyde Edwards-Helaire getting in his first start. We all remember what Kareem Hunt did once he got past his first fumble. Blew up the Patriots completely in Foxborough. And also, they're going to be up, probably, according to Vegas. And they usually know more than most of us.
Mm-hmm.
So why not pound the ball to the rookie, see what he can do against an NFL defense that has J.J. Watt. Just see what happens.
So if I set the over-under on touches in this game for Clyde Edwards-Helaire at like 18, what would you guys take?
Over.
I would say I think you're right on, but I think more of those would be receptions than people realize. And I think here's how I see this game. They jump up. It's Kelsey, Tyreek. They jump up 14-3. Darrell Williams comes in for 2 series, runs. What do you think? What do you think of that, Marcus? Do you think that's a fair thought?
Yeah, I think that's right. Now, what I was going to say about the touches is if Clyde Edwards-Helaire gets 18 touches in this offense against this Houston defense, I think it's pretty safe to say he's probably going to get over that 20 fantasy point threshold, right? I don't see any way that he's not super productive in this game. The Chiefs are going to want to show off their new toy. Andy Reid's been in his office all season long or all offseason figuring out little ways to get him involved and going back into his Philadelphia days and looking at how he got Brian Westbrook open in the screen game and different ways to get him involved in the passing game. I think this is going to be the Clyde Edwards-Helaire show on Thursday night. And, when we turn on our TVs on Friday morning, we're going to be talking about how did this rookie running back fall all the way to the Chiefs at the end of the first round. So I think he's in for a pretty big game.
the Chiefs have drafted well. We think of them trading up for Mahomes, and I don't even want to tempt or torture the Bears fans about any of that, But also that brings up 2 points. Scott Barrett, when he was on, he said a target is worth three
times what a
carry is.
Yes.
So if we think of those 18 touches as 12 carries, 6 targets, that seems reasonable, right? I even think that might be low.
Yeah, and I think Scott does a great job with some of those stats. And now here's a question I've actually posed to him. 3, carries is equal to 1 target, but how much is 1 target from Patrick Mahomes worth, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Because he can put you in positions where, you're on the move and you're running with the ball 15 yards down the field. You're going to be in the red zone more often than not. So I think in this case, if he sees 6, 7 targets, I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to smash this week.
Oh, yes, especially since, you mentioned that, and that brings up another topic. I'm sorry to go off the rails, but
No, we're good.
not all carries are alike. Not even all red zone carries are created equal. Some are
Perfect,
at the
yep.
1 and some are at the 19. And the other thought I had is if Houston does get down, all right, I'm playing David Johnson everywhere I have him in dynasty leagues.
Mhm.
But I could see a scenario where Duke Johnson, if they're down.
Again, is Deshaun Watson is he going to take the check down? Because it's just something he hasn't done in his career at Clemson, and it's something he hasn't done in Houston. He's a guy that loves to create the big plays. We've seen there's no bigger fan of Duke Johnson than I am. Literally right next to me is a picture or a framed jersey of Duke Johnson from Miami sitting right on the floor next to me. I just think this is a terrible fit in Houston's offense. He needs to be, if he was in a team like, with the Raiders, if he was with Derek Carr, he would be getting 80 receptions a year. I don't know what to think about Duke Johnson in this Texans offense. I want to see Deshaun Watson being more open to taking those short underneath throws. But until he does, I can't trust I can't trust Duke Johnson in my lineup.
I don't think you could trust Duke Johnson because of the opportunity cost that they got David Johnson at. You trade away arguably your team's best player just because he wanted a contract extension. Bill O'Brien has to double down and prove doubters wrong, sort of like how David Gettleman had to with Leonard Williams.
That's some wise words, Mr. 14-year-old. Those are some wise words. Sunk cost theorem.
Exactly. Yes. I was going to say, he understands it. That's great.
Every form of business, people say, I paid $10 for that. I know it's only worth $8. All right, so let me invest 3 more into it. Hopefully it'll double. It's one 100%. Of those things. All right, here's a crazy stat that I found. I don't think Rhys has this one. Last year, Carlos Hyde, his first ever 1,000-yard season.
I knew that.
And isn't that hard to believe?
Yes.
He's been around forever, and that he started for a bunch of teams too, and that was his first 1,000-yard year. I was shocked when I saw that as well.
And it was only by a nickel he made it or whatever.
Yeah, 45 yards.
He only stuck his big toe over the line.
Right.
Well, Marcus, this has been awesome. Hopefully you'll join us some during the season. We'll reach back out. We've enjoyed this.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Hopefully, so the young man, he shows me up all the time, but it's all good.
Yes, good luck. I'm hoping that you get a nice fantasy win over your dad here soon.
So does
we
he.
haven't even drafted
so
on
does
that
he.
one.
So does he. Thanks, Marcus.
Bye.
Yeah.